In the first episode, we found out that the nuclear industry has been under threat from terrorism for a long time.
Well, I fear today that we have the most credible threats that we've ever had.
We saw that the way the industry is organized makes it possible to create improvised nuclear devices or dirty bombs.
They can contaminate large areas, a large-scale radiological weapon, which makes those areas unusable.
We looked into how nuclear plants would resist an aerial attack.
We can't go out and say either that nuclear facilities would easily resist any impact from a large aircraft.
Nuclear security is nothing if not secret. We're not talking about safety linked to the risk of accidents, but the risk of terrorist attacks, sabotage, or planned explosions.
This is the most immediate and extreme threat to global security.
Is a nuclear attack possible? This is a question which remains absolutely taboo. Whether we're talking about the credibility of a threat or the measures in the event of an attack, national security dictates that nobody has the right to know, neither civilians nor the media, nor even the majority of political leaders.
I can't go into detail because it's secret.
In nuclear security, it would be wrong to reveal any information which might help our enemies.
This is confidential information.
Is the answer yes or no? I'm not asking...
No, I'm not going to answer.
Even the experts to whom governments entrust the monitoring of the nuclear sector are often kept powerless and at a distance.
Nothing. I personally, nothing.
When I talked about this, I came under enormous pressure. Why are you talking about this? Who authorized you to speak about this?
In the face of today's terrorist threat, is simply trusting the authorities good enough?
We're Greenpeace!
It wouldn't even take sophisticated weapons to overcome the escort. They'd be powerless.
We've chosen not to reveal any of the most sensitive information. This film has taken 2 years of investigations in which we try to answer the question which concerns us all. Beneath the secrecy, are governments and the nuclear industry capable of guaranteeing our security?
One of the main lessons of September 11th is don't underestimate the adversary.
Since we can't be sure of the resistance of reactors, would it not be better to prevent planes flying close to them? How are countries protecting their airspace? Ever since 9/11, the whole world has stepped up security checks in airports. In terms of investing in aviation security, the US leads the way, having spent $22 billion, and it's proving to be effective. Since the attacks in New York, no airliner has been hijacked with the intention of causing deaths. But away from the increased security in airports, American nuclear plants are under no obligation to implement extra safety measures.
What can you do? You could put in place anti-aircraft measures, such as anti-aircraft artillery or missiles or something like that at the plant to shoot down an incoming aircraft. You could do that. That's not required. No plant does that. You could create, in addition, a no-fly zone within X miles of a nuclear power plant. We could do that. We have not done that. You could perhaps string cables or something so that if an aircraft tried to hit the reactor, it would run into the cables. We could do that. We don't require it. No reactor has that in place. And so as a result, unfortunately, every single US nuclear power plant is vulnerable to an airborne attack. And the same is true for all or virtually all nuclear power plants around the world. Now, why did they do this? They did this because it would be expensive.
Likewise, in Germany, in anticipation of the definitive closing of all reactors in 2022, the airspace has to be protected. A rather original technological solution has been found. In the event of an attack, the nuclear facility emits thick artificial fog, like the ink of giant squid.
The idea was discussed here, too, during the years following 9/11. Employing artificial fog in nuclear facilities. And it was even deployed on the Philipsburg site, for example. It's true. But I don't want to go into details. It's important not to share any information which could give anyone any ideas.
Das ist ein bisschen absurd. Vernebelung hat es in Richtung
It was an absurd idea.
Kriegsschiffen gegeben, die sich
These artificial fog systems already exist for warships.
Position ändern.
They deploy the fog, but they also change their position at the same time. However, this is not exactly an option for nuclear plants. Then there was the idea of scrambling the GPS coordinates of the plants. But since GPS is not the only system which helps the navigation of planes, that wouldn't have been any use. The plant operators put forward a third element, which was that planes could be shot down while the fog was still around. The idea would be to shoot at the airliner even if passengers were on board. But the Federal Constitutional Court ruled against this because the state cannot cause the death of innocent people. So the whole concept of defense against deliberate plane attacks in Germany failed.
The refusal of the German Constitutional Court to allow planes with passengers on board to be shot down led to a stalemate. How could nuclear facilities be protected from aerial attacks? On March the 10th, 2017, contact was lost with an Air India Boeing crossing German airspace. Despite repeated attempts from air traffic controllers to contact the plane, there was complete radio silence. The German authorities activated the Renegade Alert. This procedure had been put into place following the Constitutional Court's decision. Military fighter jets were scrambled immediately. In this footage, we can see a fighter jet coming up alongside the Air India plane and try to make contact with it. They still got no reply. Phase 2 of the Renegade Alert was triggered. Since planes presenting a threat were not allowed to be shot down, this meant instead that every nuclear plant in the country was to be evacuated one by one. Since 2010, the Renegade Alert has been activated 6 times.
Nevertheless, we have to be thankful that in each case, it turned out to be only a question of these planes having technical problems, transmission problems. The same applies to this most recent incident. What makes this one particularly worrying was that it took rather a long time before it was confirmed that it was only a pre-alert.
In contrast to Germany, France maintains the right to be able to shoot down an aircraft which is deliberately heading towards a nuclear plant, even if it's a large plane full of passengers. In the event of a serious nuclear accident, the crisis would be managed from this technical centre. This is where we meet Vice Admiral Mouton, who is in charge of defence at the Institute for Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety.
Since 9/11, the Air Force keeps 5 to 6 patrols on permanent alert. In other words, there are a couple of planes ready to take off at a moment's notice at any time of night or day. This is one of the Air Force's primary missions. It's considered vital, and a lot of resources are deployed to prevent an aeroplane getting close to a nuclear facility. So whenever there's abnormal behavior surrounding a plane, there's a whole chain of command, starting with the Air Force Detection Unit, which passes it on to an operational centre, which in turn contacts the CDAOA, the French Air Defence and Air Operations Command. The CDAOA then has to inform the Prime Minister immediately, because it's the Prime Minister's role to decide if any coercive measures should be taken. This is one of the Prime Minister's permanent responsibilities.
In the event of a plane being hijacked, how long would the Prime Minister have to decide whether to shoot the plane down or not? Is it a matter of minutes or seconds? We managed to obtain a strategy document from the French Air Defense Unit. It contains a map of military bases, indicating where the operational patrols are posted and how long they need to get into action. A fighter jet would need 15 minutes to get to the nuclear sites which are furthest away from one of these 4 military bases.
It's actually 15 minutes from the moment that the alert is given. And it's 15 minutes to reach the edge of the circle.
Our attention is drawn to a particular point on the map. The reprocessing plant at La Hague in the north of the Cotentin Peninsula. It's situated at the very edge of the range of 2 military bases responsible for its protection. So 15 minutes away, and yet this site contains the largest concentration of radioactive material in the world. Amongst other substances, there are 10,000 tons of spent fuels, 15,000 containers of high-level waste, and almost 60 tons of plutonium. So is the facility well protected? This is the question that has been posed by the Local Information Committee of La Hague. It asked numerous experts, including the region's military attaché. This was his reply. Any aircraft that is likely to enter into the prohibited airspace around the plant will be contacted by radio and, if necessary, intercepted by a military plane. But a footnote specifies that, more often than not, interventions occur after the event. Interceptions take place, but only after the offending aircraft has already flown over the prohibited zone. The fighter jet arrives too late. In 2014, several mysterious drones illegally flew over a number of French nuclear sites. The authorities finally admitted that every nuclear facility, without exception, had been flown over in this way. But the presence of the drones remains unexplained.
Well, there have been no more drones flying over recently, but of course we are keeping vigilant. Having said that, these drones are absolutely nothing to worry about in regards to nuclear security. All our facilities are capable of resisting aircraft, so our ability to resist far outweighs a drone and whatever a drone could carry.
In stark contrast to the reassuring line taken by the nuclear industry, the pictures coming from the ISIS battleground show a different reality. The types of drones sold by their millions around the world for leisure purposes are here being transformed into fearsome bomb launchers. The onboard camera enables the drone to get close to the enemy unseen, to target with precision and to film the casualties. No obstacles get in the way of these new war drones and can be used to support ground offensives. They can cause immense damage. What would it be like on a nuclear facility?
The bomb-carrying capacity of drones has increased considerably and is worrying. There's been huge progress. In terms of delivery drones, they can now carry anything from 500 grams to 40 kilos. If any explosives weighing this much were dropped on a reactor, it could well provoke a nuclear catastrophe.
Drone technology is progressing at alarming speed. Governments seem powerless. Anyone can go online, on Chinese websites for example, and order drones in kit form and have them delivered anonymously and assemble them at home. Some models have a payload of several dozen kilos. They can even take the weight of a human. But the weakest link in security surely comes from the fact that it's so easy to program a drone's destination. Just by selecting the GPS coordinates from Google Maps, a site can be targeted down to the last meter. So it's theoretically possible, with only basic technical knowledge, to build and send a device carrying several dozen kilos of explosives over the sensitive zones of nuclear facilities. Once again, the nuclear reprocessing plant at La Hague seems to be a perfect target. 4 large pools store spent fuel produced from all the French nuclear power stations before being reprocessed. These pools contain the equivalent volume of 130 reactor cores. In 2008, in one of our previous documentaries, we were allowed to film this sensitive zone. But on one condition, we weren't allowed to show the roof. Why? Ghislain Kettel started working at La Hague in 1966 before the plant had even started operating.
Look, let me show you the first pool that existed, without any roofing. It's the first time I've ever shown anyone this photo.
He worked his whole career here, including 15 years as head of radiation protection. He knows every last corner of the pools.
So what you see here is one of the 4 spent fuel pools at The Hague. And you can see that it's covered by a metal structure with just a bit of cladding. That's all. It's a metal roof, not dissimilar to the type of roof you find in car garages. We didn't take into account the possibility of terrorism. The fuel in a reactor is covered by a double dome, a double shell, that I call a concrete cathedral. So when the hot fuel, which is highly radioactive, but used, leaves the shell, it's transferred to a pool with just a simple metal roof over it. In my opinion, and it's an opinion shared by many experts, this is really the biggest scandal in today's nuclear industry, whether in France or elsewhere.
The reprocessing plant at La Hague is not the only nuclear facility to possess a spent fuel pool. Every reactor has one, built alongside the reactor building itself. The pools help cool down the spent fuel assemblies when they're removed from the core and replaced. This high-level radioactive waste is extremely hot and stays in the pools for several years before being removed.
If we work on the theory that the pool might gradually empty, be it a nuclear reactor pool, or even worse, the spent fuel pool at La Hague, then obviously it would be a huge catastrophe, because once the fuel has dried up, it could spontaneously ignite. Then you would have a nuclear fire with no protection, and all the nuclear fission materials would contaminate the air, creating considerably large amounts of radioactive fallout. So this is something which must absolutely be avoided.
Greenpeace has launched a big campaign to draw attention to the vulnerability of spent fuel pools. Their surrounding walls are only 30 centimetres thick and were not designed to withstand a terrorist attack. A spectacular stunt has been organised. 8 activists are going to try and break into the Cattenom nuclear plant and set off fireworks at the foot of the pool. The night before the stunt, Yannick Rousselet, head of the anti-nuclear campaign, is giving a last brief.
In the case of a problem with a pool, what would happen at the present time, what's been planned for, is to do with safety. So, for example, in the event of an earthquake or a pipe being cut, there would be a leak. The pool would empty slowly, and that's catered for. But if there's a 2-square-metre hole in the middle of the pool due to an explosion, then the pool would empty just like that. It would be physically impossible for anyone to get anywhere near straight away. The dose would be lethal instantly. So that's why tomorrow our plan, as I explained earlier, is to show the weaknesses of these pools. So it's 4:40 in the morning, and we're driving north towards Cattenom. Once inside the inner perimeter, the activists will try to get inside the plant. Their aim is obviously to go undetected, to enter into the facility, and then we want to show that there's a way, that it's possible to get right up close, within touching distance of these pools. Because clearly anyone with malicious intent could then cause an explosion, which would unfortunately set off a major accident. Switch everything off, everything. We'll get out. Let's get out.
That's the pool, right? It's that building there, isn't it? You do agree that it's that building there, right? Okay, so let's go that way, over there. Let's go towards the machine. Is that good for you? Oh, we're not really in front of it, but if we go over there, the banner won't be seen. Something's in the way. It mustn't be hidden. Okay, here's good. Yeah, here's perfect. Wait. Oh, shit.
And here come the police. The police are outside the gates, but they're panicking because they're on the wrong side.
Okay, let's do this.
Let's do it. Let's go. Let's light them up. Come on. Keep the wind off me.
As the activists light the fuses, the police still haven't got out of their car.
Watch out, everybody. Here they go.
We're Greenpeace!
We're Greenpeace.
We're Greenpeace!
We're Greenpeace.
The police can only stand and watch the show from the wrong side of the fence.
So we've just demonstrated that we could get right up close to these pools. But in the end, even from the outside, from where we were filming, we were less than 100 meters away from the pools. Which means that anyone with criminal intent and armed with the sort of weapons that are routinely seized in police raids across France, or that have been used in attacks on armoured vehicles, would have an extremely good chance of blowing a hole in one of these pools.
The general public had already been alerted to the vulnerability of spent fuel pools after the Fukushima accident. Footage of buildings ripped apart, with smoke rising from pools open to the air, went global. Firefighters doused the high-level radioactive waste so that it wouldn't catch fire, in turn releasing radioactive water into the environment. These pictures also showed a characteristic feature, which is hard to believe, in that these spent fuel pools are built inside roofs above the reactors. 1 in 7 reactors in use around the world has this particular design called a boiling water reactor.
If it were me, I would not put a pool hanging in the air. You know, it was convenient to put the pool up that high because, you know, you can just take the top off the reactor and move the fuel easily. But in terms of other situations, be they natural earthquakes or man-made through terrorism or something like that, it's more risky for the pool to be that far above ground.
The American physicist Frank von Hippel founded the program on science and global security at Princeton University. He discovered that the NRC, the American Nuclear Regulatory Commission, had not taken into account the threat of terrorism in the design and operation of spent fuel pools.
I asked them that, why didn't you take into account the risk of terrorism? They said we didn't know how to calculate it, and therefore we assumed it was zero. You know, I agree that they don't know how to calculate it, but to ignore it is irresponsible.
Alison McFarlane chaired the NRC between 2012 and 2014. On taking up the post, she discovered a very worrying situation regarding the state of pools. Although they're only supposed to hold a limited amount of spent fuel during the cooling phase, most of the pools in the US are more or less full.
I would have liked more regulation on spent fuel pools, or at least more research into some of the situation with spent fuel pools, and I couldn't even get that far.
And when you were at the head of the NRC, what were you able to change?
Nothing. I personally, nothing.
So what are the obstacles that you have met?
The other commissioners were the obstacles that I met. They believed analyses that were done 20, 30 or more years ago that said that the pools were safe, but these were very simplistic analyses and they didn't consider some of the issues that we now understand. And certainly back then, when these analyses were done, the pools weren't half as full as they are now. So it's, I As a scientist, I feel it's always good to continue to question and to collect data and information, and data is very helpful in making policy decisions. But my fellow commissioners did not agree. So I think that if you're going to look at the security and safety of spent fuel pools, you should do so because of the potential for disruption from earthquakes, but the potential for disruption from terrorists. And no, it's not done. It's frustrating, I agree.
Why is it that the head of the regulators of the American nuclear industry was prevented by her colleagues from seeking alternatives to the danger of pools?
U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has basically been captured by the industry. The NRC takes it very seriously when the industry says, you'll kill us if you require this.
The problem is that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission wears two hats. One of its hats, it's the regulator, and the other one of its hats, it's the facilitator, it's the promoter of the nuclear industry. So when it thinks, oh, we should raise the security requirements, and it says, uh-oh, nope, that might hurt the industry, it would cost them profits, so therefore we're going to reduce security.
At the present time, about 70% of the spent fuel in the US is stored in these vulnerable facilities. But one solution does exist. Spent fuel assemblies can be stored in special containers called dry casks. The containers are then stored on site. This solution is seen as the safest one, as it avoids hazardous material being both densely concentrated or moved about. Certain countries such as Germany have opted for this technology, and by doing this have secured a large share of their spent fuel.
The U.S. industry objects to this option of moving spent fuel from pools to dry casks because it would cost, they estimated, about $4 billion for the 100 pools in the United States. And they say the risk is so low and the cost is so high that we really shouldn't do it. The cost, they say that the benefit isn't worth the cost.
These are businesses that are in the business of making a profit and making money. And right now we're in a situation, especially in the United States, where the price of natural gas is so low that we are now finding that several reactors cannot function economically, and there's no willingness to purchase their electricity, and so they're now looking at an accelerated closure scenario.
Half of American nuclear plants are losing money. The bill has risen to $3 billion a year. It's not surprising that 4 nuclear facilities have already closed down in the last few years, and 4 others are due to be closed in the coming years. Since 9/11, the NRC has forced the American nuclear industry to invest $2 billion in the strengthening of plant security. But even that seems way below what is needed.
For example, on 9/11, there were 20 attackers. Okay, so we know 20 attackers can attack on the same day. Okay, how many attackers are US plants required to defend against? Not 20. How many? Well, it has been disclosed, it has been leaked, that the number is 5 or 6. Okay, why 5 or 6, not 20? Because the industry doesn't want to pay to defend against 20. And so the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission says, okay, you only have to defend against 5 or 6, even though we know, and it's occurred in the past in the US, that 20 have attacked on the same day. So people have this conception that what the NRC does is it says, what's a real threat? What's the real level of threat, credible threat? And then it says to industry, you must protect against this credible level of threat. And that is not what the NRC does. What the NRC does is says, here's the credible level of threat, but here's what the industry is willing to pay to protect against. So you protect against this threat.
Terrorists have changed their ways of operating. Technology has changed too. In France, the intelligence services are constantly evaluating the levels of genuine threat and the type of attacks that the country and nuclear sites risk undergoing. The operators AREVA, the French Atomic Energy Commission, and EDF have all been forced to progressively adapt their protection measures.
The government have been asking us to put into place measures which are permanently reinforced. And I say permanently reinforced because, unfortunately, the threat evolves constantly. Several hundred million euros have already been invested during the period of, let's say, 2001 up to the last 3 or 4 years. And we're making further investments of around 700 million euros, which means that over €1 billion will have been invested in the strengthening of the security of our facilities. This is on top of all the money we spend every year in operating costs. What I call operating costs, such as over 100 million euros for policing, and then more or less the same amount, another 100 million euros, that go towards all the personnel contributing to the security system.
Surveillance cameras, barriers. It's impossible to know any more details about the security measures put in place. The information is classified. But what have been visible since their creation in 2009 are the special brigades of French military police, the PSPG. 21 units of around 40 men are permanently stationed within French nuclear facilities.
That's a PSPG patrol, keeping permanent watch around the perimeter of the site. There's a road which goes all around the inside of the plant, and this surveillance is permanent, 24 hours a day, carried out by these men on site. We're constantly upgrading this setup. There are more than 1,000 men in these specialized military units. By specialized, I mean that they've been trained by the French Tactical Intervention Group to combat terrorism. We have a contract with the National Military Police Service to employ up to 1,000 police officers all year round. That costs us about 100 million euros.
The police are on the wrong side of the gates.
In view of the ever-increasing bill for security expenditure, are the French nuclear operators trying to keep protection to a minimum, as we've seen in the US?
It's clear that the dialogue is not easy because we at the IRSN in particular, or the Nuclear Safety Authority, we want things to move quickly. But today the operators, that's to say EDF, Arriva, and the CEA, are in a delicate financial position. And so this complicates matters for us. On one hand, there are obviously people like me who find that it's taking too long. And then there are the operators who are looking at their finances, and they can see that it's going to be difficult for them to carry out measures any quicker. And that's where the role of the Nuclear Safety Authority comes in, using its regulatory coercive powers, and effectively puts pressure on the operators to carry out what's been agreed. With all things considered, I would say that in the immediate, I would like us to move forward on a certain number of issues, especially combating terrorist commandos, and I'd like us to go faster on cyber defense.
In 2007, Estonia sustained a cyber attack and the country was brought to a standstill for several days. In 2008, it was Georgia's turn to be the victim, this time from Russia in an attack which paralyzed the country's infrastructure. And in 2013, 3 billion Yahoo accounts were hacked. In 2015, right after the shooting at the offices of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris, 25,000 French websites were hacked, and their home pages were replaced by Islamic messages of hate. In this climate of cyber warfare, do nuclear sites represent a real target?
In the long run, I do think that we will see cyber-physical attacks of some type coming from terrorist groups. It's only a matter of time. I think, hopefully, right now, there's not so much of this capability in the world, and that we're still in a time and a place where we could put a lot of effort into fixing these things before they become real dangers.
The problem in terms of the nuclear sector is that a cyber attack could happen in an attempt to take over control rooms. That means taking control of the machines involved in the running of the plant, those that open and close valves, or what have you. I think that the only threat that exists, if one does indeed exist, is the risk of cyber attack, especially since it's a new threat. And even if we know a certain number of things about them, we've by no means finished putting blocks and barriers in the way of these attacks.
The keystone of cyber defense is the protection of the computer network. The system which controls the reactor and other critical parts of the facility is a closed network and has no connection to the internet nor other networks which could infect it. It's isolated by air gapping, a security measure which is supposed to guarantee that it cannot be broken into by anyone trying to attack.
So usually when you're talking about the safety and security of industrial systems, whether it's a nuclear power plant or water facility, electrical facility, any of these types of systems, people will respond that they are air-gapped. I personally hate this phrase, air-gap. What it means is you haven't connected any of this stuff to the internet. But it has a sort of false promise, an illusionary security that doesn't really help you. When I have done work with people in these environments, you ask them, how do you protect your system? And if their only answer is the air gap, then we worry.
The important thing to note is that the reactor's control and command systems are the sensitive areas of a nuclear facility and that they are totally airtight. There is no connection to the outside, nor to the internet. And on top of that, we have strengthened this protection even more over the last few years. This means that the control system is totally independent from everything else. It cannot be accessed from outside.
It's a complete fallacy to think that in the IT world, a system can be totally closed. We could never count on that. Every system eventually gets linked up with another.
So a vendor is able to walk into this system, install new software or hardware. Sometimes they carry a USB stick, or it might be on a CD that you load up the software. So information still goes to the computer and still comes out of the computer. It just doesn't do it directly connected to the internet.
So first you have to control and organize who you exchange with, and this can be restricting for people. So the more you need to exchange, the higher the level of security culture needs to be to master these exchanges. And the second thing is you must know exactly what is happening within your system. In other words, you need to set up means of enabling you to know at all time what is going on, so that you can tell if anything abnormal is happening within the system.
Beyond hardwired connections, there's been a huge development in wireless networking. This modern technology increases vulnerabilities. Pirating a wireless connection is child's play for hackers. Drones can also be extremely effective weapons in this area. They have receptors which are able to intercept communications transmitted not only by computers, but from robots, printers, and many other control command systems.
This might explain why drones would be used to fly over nuclear facilities in France or in other countries to surveil them as the beginning of an attack. So flying a drone over these facilities can often get you network information or wireless sensor values. Then you might gather all kinds of sensitive data, such as the types of sensors that are used, what protocol is used, what radio spectrum is used. You might even be lucky enough to get credentials, so the logins to individual sensors or controllers that are used outside of the plant. Usually the inside of a reactor system will not have wireless used in this way because it's too unreliable. But some of the systems that they depend on a little bit farther from the plant, for example, nuclear fuel processing, might use wireless in this way.
But the most difficult threat to control comes undoubtedly from within. Nuclear facilities employ hundreds of personnel, and they also subcontract heavily. Every employee is a potential weak link in the system's security. On August 5, 2014, the Doel power plant in Belgium was victim of an extremely serious act of sabotage. Somebody within the building deliberately opened a valve, emptying 65,000 litres of oil used by the electricity-producing turbine. Without the oil, the turbine overheated and had to be destroyed, causing reactor number 4 to stop operating for several months.
The incident highlights all the weaknesses of a security system which was first and foremost designed to prevent attacks from the outside. And yet this act of sabotage, because that's what it was a deliberate act of sabotage, it's obvious that it was carried out from the inside. And insiders, those working within the plant, clearly represent the greatest danger to nuclear security. It's also extraordinary that 2.5 years after this act of sabotage, which we can call an act of terrorism, we still don't know who was responsible for it, even though it all took place inside the plant, with those who were working there. There was an investigation, a lie detector was even used, although some did refuse to submit to the lie detector, but we heard nothing from the prosecutors. Right from the outset, the Federal Agency for Nuclear Control wondered, so what are we going to do about this, since the plant has been sabotaged by someone from the inside? Monsieur Benz, the head of the agency, admitted that it would be very difficult for the site to carry on running if the perpetrator or perpetrators were not caught. And yet by December, the plant was up and running again, without us being any the wiser. It's possible that the facility is functioning with the saboteurs still within.
There have been worrying causes of radicalized insiders at the Doel plant. In 2013, an engineer who refused to shake hands with a superior because she was a woman was fired. This engineer was the brother-in-law of a jihadist who'd gone to join up with ISIS in Syria. And what is astonishing is that at the time of the incident and his subsequent dismissal, he was training to become an operator of the nuclear reactor. Many weaknesses exist in the defense strategies of nuclear facilities. Even when countries spend big amounts of money, nothing can guarantee that an attack won't take place. So the ultimate question is, what would the consequences be for citizens of nuclear states? To answer this question, it's worth looking at the example of the American plant of Indian Point. It's situated only 54 kilometers from Manhattan, the center of New York.
Today, Indian Point is sitting in the middle of the most densely populated part of the United States. And there are more than 16 million people within an 80-kilometer radius of Indian Point. This makes Indian Point a very attractive target for terrorists. An attack on Indian Point would probably have the greatest radiological and economic consequences of an attack on any plant in the United States.
At Princeton University, American scientist Frank von Hippel's team have come up with computer modeling, which evaluates the degree of contamination of an area in the event of fire in a spent fuel pool of a nuclear plant. For the purposes of our film, we asked him to imagine a terrorist attack at Indian Point. His team calculated the degree of radioactive contamination, taking into account the actual weather conditions on the first day of each month of 2015. The zones in red and orange indicate the areas that would have to be evacuated. Frank von Hippel called us to give us the results.
On average, the area would be about 60,000 square kilometers, and the population that would have to be relocated would be about 13 million people. For the worst case, it would be about 35 million people and about 175,000 square kilometers.
In the event of an attack on Indian Point, and depending on weather conditions, up to 35 million people would have to be evacuated, the equivalent of over half the population of France. In France itself, the Institute for Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety has also studied the consequences of a nuclear accident on the population.
So this study, which was carried out by the IRSN, took as its starting point an accident in one of the reactors of the Belleville nuclear plant in central France. It showed that the radioactive fallout could, depending on weather conditions, that is, wind and rain, cover a huge part of the country and have toxic after effects on large parts of the population, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away. There would even be high levels of concentration travelling great distances, because in places where there's little rain, the winds would carry fallout a long way. So toxic clouds could occur over the Pyrenees Mountains, for example, or over other mountain ranges to the east, which would cause radioactive fallout in Germany or Luxembourg. And all this is dependent on weather conditions which cannot be planned for in any way. France has 19 power plant sites spread out all over the country, which means that, realistically, any and all parts of the country, including the Paris region, could find themselves under radioactive clouds, with potentially harmful consequences for the entire population.
In 2004, I completed a study where I looked at the potential radiological consequences to New York City of an attack on Indian Point. And I found that there could be up to several 100,000 cancer deaths as a result of the radioactivity that would be released from such an incident. New York City has some of the most expensive real estate in the world. You also have to consider the economic impact of essentially rendering this city uninhabitable for decades. Decontamination of the city would be the cost would be absolutely astronomical, several $1 trillion. So compared to the estimated economic impact of Fukushima to Japan is now about $200 billion US, and we're talking about an order of magnitude 10 times greater than that.
We're talking about several hundred billion euros, which is the entire budget of Belgium. It's the budget for retirement pension. The city of Antwerp, which is the country's largest economic financial centre, would cease to exist. So we don't know how to equate this value to the minor amount necessary to ensure nuclear security. The right security is above all security which takes full precedence over any economic factors. That's the first thing to be said, that operators make security the absolute priority, not just in words, but in actions.
The global nuclear industry is in a bad way. Westinghouse, the biggest ever builder of nuclear reactors, went bankrupt at the beginning of 2017. In France, Areva has accumulated losses exceeding 10 billion euros. The government came to its rescue by injecting 4.5 billion euros. The situation of EDF, the other major French operator, is even more critical. Their debt has reached colossal proportions, 37 billion euros. The French government also bailed them out in 2017 to the tune of 4 billion euros. President Macron has admitted that the nuclear sector was only surviving thanks to state aid. In the US, where the industry is privatized, half of the nuclear plants are losing money. And the state here doesn't come to the rescue. With all this in mind, does the nuclear industry really have the finances to pay for the security that's needed in the face of the terrorist threat?
Captain said we're in the forbidden zone now, too, so we're very close. This is about as close as I've ever gotten, actually. I've never gotten this close before, so we're very close. I've never gotten this close, never. So just so you know.
We wanted to test out for ourselves the protection of the Indian Point plant close to New York. It was the site targeted by Mohammed Atta, one of the 9/11 terrorists. Along with Cliff Weathers from Riverkeeper, the Hudson River Protection Group, we managed to enter the prohibited zone of the river. We've been here for half an hour already.
You can see a lot of detail that I have not been able to see before. What is amazing is that we just don't see any security, no signs of security whatsoever, no boats and no signs telling people to keep away, and nobody's come out to engage us or look at us. It's kind of shocking that we're being left alone here. I can't see this as being acceptable, can you? It's like it doesn't matter to them.
The U.S. is forgetting the lessons of September 11th. One of the main lessons of September 11th is don't underestimate the adversary. Don't think that you know enough about what terrorists think, what their capabilities are, what their intentions are. You need to have skepticism about your own ability. You think you have enough security, add another layer.
It's as if 9/11 never happened. And now we just sort of are acting like ostriches. We put our head into the sand and say, oh, we don't remember that. We will take no action as a result of that. And when it happens, you know, God forbid, people will say, oh, we could never have imagined that would happen. And that's completely illogical. It's intellectually dishonest, and it's unethical.
It's an untenable position for the government to say, we can't simply say that this won't be something we'll have to deal with one day. We cannot justify adopting the simple attitude that, well, no, it's too complicated, so it'll never happen to us. They just wouldn't dare.
I think we've been quite fortunate. We cannot rely on the fact that it hasn't happened yet to say that there's no threat. That is not something in which we can protect our society and rely on purely that we have been lucky.
The thing that will destroy the nuclear power industry for good will be one successful terrorist attack that causes a meltdown. That's it. That's it. It will be worse than Fukushima. It will be worse than Chernobyl. It will be worse than 3 Mile Island for the industry. Because then we will know that all of the nuclear power plants are sitting ducks for terrorists.
It's a societal decision whether we should keep the industry if we feel that we can't secure it. But society has to decide whether they think that this is secure enough or not. Everybody decides that okay, we're happy to have nuclear power, we feel it's safe. We're not.